So your rental property is not working. Maybe your negative cash flow, maybe your tenants stopped paying, maybe your expenses are going up. Could be a number of things. First off, don't panic. I've definitely been in this spot before. And today I'm going to walk you through exactly what I would do to unpack this so that you can actually start to make some decisions. Step by step, when a rental property starts to go south. Whether you've got one property or a small portfolio, this is how you protect yourself, take control, and turn things around. Most people try to emotionally justify a deal. They let their emotions run hot, and they don't make great decisions. But the numbers, they do not lie. Here's what you do. First, pull out the last 3 months of your income and your expenses. Don't guess. Take a look at your bank account, your rent deposits, your repair invoices, every single thing that you have. And then third, calculate your monthly income. It's as simple as income minus expenses minus debt. Those are the 3 categories that you have to focus on. And they're all very different, and the solutions for each are very different. If you're in the red, the question is how much and why? Is it the income? Is it the mortgage? Is it the taxes? Is it the insurance? Is it utilities? What is it? Each one can be segmented. It could be even your tenant base. It could be your occupancy. It could be lots of different things. But the key is to put it all down on paper and identify the problem. And then to tackle each problem one by one with a very specific plan. You've got to know exactly where your money's going and where you're losing the opportunity to make more. That could be through income or it could be through the expenses. That's how we fix it. So if your tenant's not paying or maybe they're delayed every month, that's your first issue because that's the income that pays all the expenses. Oftentimes I see occupancy problems, concession problems, high vacancy problems, high turnover problems, all as a result of one thing, a poor tenant base, which could be something that you did, it could be something that your property management did, or it could be something that you inherited from another seller. But either way, the contract or the lease is what the tenant is supposed to abide by. And it's also what you use to enforce. Now you have to be careful here because landlord-tenant laws do apply on both sides, but always follow the lease. If they're not paying on time, then issue the proper notices immediately. And make sure that you enforce the late fees. And do not delay, because the longer they go without paying, the more, of course, you have to lose over the short term and over the long term. If it's a high maintenance tenant burning up your time and your energy, you know who they are, then it's within your rights not to renew them. I always say a wrong tenant in a good property can turn it into a bad investment real fast. I cannot stress the importance enough of running a criminal credit background check on each and every person. And make sure that whoever moves into your unit can pay you on time regularly. Then the only thing that you would have to focus on at that point would be the expenses. The vacant unit creates all kinds of expenses in the form of maintenance, in the form of marketing. Some people may not even know that you have a vacancy, but a vacancy is really just like an expense. So take care of your tenants, find the very best ones, and you'll have a good, stable cash flow for a long period of time. Second, take a very hard look at your operating expenses. There's a number of expenses, just like in your personal life, that hit a rental property. Those are things like taxes or insurance or utilities or just regular expenses to run a building or capital work or things that you might want, like a new appliance or new flooring or whatever it is. Those are all expenses that you could have personally or you also, as a landlord, could have in a rental property. The very first thing to look at is where can you lower some of those costs? And can you do any of those things differently? So, for example, if you're vending out to a third-party property manager, which is also an expense, or you have a staff, which is also an expense, you might want to take a look at, in the short term or even the long term, can I do this myself, or can I replace them out for someone for less money? When a property has high vacancy, you also have high marketing costs because you're spending money to try to attract tenants to fill up your vacancies. When you have high vacancies, you also have high maintenance and turnover costs because it costs money to paint units, clean units, put new flooring in, and do all the repairs that you need to attract those new tenants. So there are many things you can do as a landlord to question some of the expenses you have. For example, you can appeal annually your property taxes. That's one thing. In addition to that, you can change insurance providers, and you can look at things like higher deductibles, or even potentially look at coverages that you might not need that could save you money in the long run on insurance. If you're in a situation where you haven't had any losses on your insurance and your costs just keep going up, then you're probably in a really good position to be able to switch insurance providers and really negotiate that price down. This is not about being cheap. This is about protecting cash flow while you're regrouping. And annually, it's a good idea anyway just to go and take a look at all the operating expenses at your property and the things that you can do to be able to lower those. And don't forget your escrows for things like insurance and property taxes too. In many cases, the lenders over-impound those kinds of things. And of course, replacement reserves, which many lenders impound for things like painting the place or putting a new roof on. Those are all impounds potentially that might be coming out of the payment that you're sending to your lender. Those things all need to be questioned and looked at each and every year. So now let's talk about income. There are lots of ways that you can make more money on the income, both on the rental side, on the occupancy side, but also on the other income side. So we have this conversation all the time. So on a lot of properties, we look at location premiums as an example. Maybe one unit has a view, another one does not. In some cases, we've installed carports and even garages or storage units. We put yards in for pets. These are all things that you can do on the other income side of the category that have nothing to do with rent. The one thing you cannot do is raise rents in a market where rents are already at their peak. But what you can do is make sure that your occupancy is as high as possible and you're taking care of your people to maximize your income. There's two ways to run a property. The first one is to have your rent just be a little bit below market, and then you could potentially keep that tenant for a long period of time. The other way, of course, is to maximize that rent at all times, which of course is not a bad strategy. However, it can lead to more vacancies because as tenants look around, they'll say, I'm not really getting the best deal here, and you could lose them as a tenant. So what we like to do is just keep those rents just a little bit below market so that when the tenant looks around at other options, they're like, it's better off just to stay put. But of course, there's a number of other things that you can do inside of a rental property. From smart home technology to storage to parking to pet rent to laundry, there's a lot of little things that add up over time. We've also done things like rent furnished units. Way before Airbnb, we used to offer furnished rentals for people when they needed it on a nightly or weekly or even a monthly basis. And of course, you can charge more for those kinds of things. That's, of course, if you have a multitude of units in one location. But even if you don't, there's a number of people that have converted long-term rentals into mid-term rentals and short-term rentals and are doing very, very well. However, that is a different kind of business. You're now competing with that nightly, weekly, and monthly rate, which is more money, but it also is more like a business as opposed to a long-term passive income cash flowing property. So you can't strong arm rent increases into a bad experience. That will definitely backfire on you and create turnover. Next, you need to take a look at your debt. If you're underwater every month, here's what I'd do. The very first thing is I would call the lender. If you have a mortgage, ask if you can modify the terms, stretch out the amortization, or even ask if you could fix the rate or some kind of adjustment, even something around the impounds. But the one thing for you to understand is the lenders definitely do not want the properties back. Lenders that go into default are bad for lenders. So calling them up and working through solutions with them is always a win-win. So lenders do not want properties coming back to them, and they do not want properties going into default. Their job is to lend on the property. The property is the collateral for the loan. The last thing they want is to see you fail. So calling them and working through these issues can always be a win-win. They are going to help you succeed. So make sure you put all your cards on the table and sit down with them and try to work out whatever you can. Through that discussion, you might need to come up with a short-term cash injection. Just wrap your head around that. However, if you're protecting equity, and a lot of equity potentially, it might not be a bad solution. What you need is to fix the root issue, the problem that's creating the negative cash flow. A word of caution, do not refinance into a worse deal just to kick the can down the road. None of us can project values being more in the future. So the last thing that you need to do is just kick the can down the road on some kind of a refinance. I see this mistake a lot. The goal is to fix the debt and the debt payment, not to just patch the bleeding. Now, sometimes selling will be the best move. If the numbers don't make sense and the property is draining your time and wallet, you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be prepared for this if it, in fact, is the best alternative. If you decide to sell, you need to run a CMA or competitive market analysis or a BLV, a broker's opinion of value. You need to find out what the market will pay for whatever it is that you own. The second thing is the property has to be show ready. There can't be a lot of deferred maintenance, and it can't appear that you are any kind of a distress. The third, of course, is you're going to know, are you either in the money or out of the money? In other words, is the loan less than the value, or is the loan more than the value? If the loan's more than the value, then potentially you might have a cash in sale. So you have to come to closing with cash to actually get out of this deal. If it's a cash out sale, now you get your equity, but now you've stopped the bleeding on that negative cash flow. So that can be a real nice win. But you definitely have to clean up the property and make all the improvements you need along the way. In either case, hopefully you have a CPA as one of your team members. You need to check with them about the tax consequences. In either case, you need to talk to your CPA before you move forward, because there are tax consequences with selling a property where the loan is more than the value. And there are also tax consequences for selling a property where there's equity to take out of a property. So either you take on that equity and you have a potential capital gain, or you can 1031, which is a 1031 tax deferred exchange, into something else. But what we're trying to do here is stop the bleeding on a negative cash flowing property. The best scenario could be a full sale, but you need to check with your tax advisor. Let's be real. This is exactly how we all learn. And I've made a number of mistakes along the way, especially when I first got started. So now, 30 years later, here are some proven methods that I always do today. Number one, I only buy properties with proven cash flow and hopefully have some kind of forced equity or capital gain in the future. But I don't bank on that capital gain. Two, I stress test the deal. What happens if it's vacant for a month? Can you still trust it? And three, I always build reserves. So I like to have at least 3 to 6 months of expenses in the form of income in some kind of reserve to be able to cover anything that could happen. Things like the pandemic, which I definitely went through. When we had lots of cash during the pandemic, I was not sweating it because we hadn't distributed all that money and we had a whole bunch of money sitting in reserves. A bad deal can definitely set you back, but a smart deal can definitely set you up for the long term. If this video hit home and you have a rental property that you're stressed out about, maybe have some anxiety over, you have negative cash flow, it's just not working out the way you thought, you are not alone. So click the link below and join us in Texas this July. Bad months happen and tough deals happen. What you do next is what separates landlords who survive to ones that scale. Get honest, take action, and get some support. That's what people do to get ahead. That's what people do to win when things go south.